guys, and I'm back to do another video. I hope you guys are having a wonderful Sunday. Let me move this back just a little bit. There we go. I hope you're having a terrific Sunday. It's just been such a wonderful weekend with the news that we got about Biden and Harris. It was exciting, and we were partying and celebrating in my house, and I hope you guys did the same. I'm Joyce. Joyce knows who done it. Back with another mystery for you. Today I'm going to do one on someone I used to have the biggest crush on when I was a teenager, and if you're like me, you probably did too. And this is Frederick Carl Prinze. Who is Frederick Carl Prinze? That is Freddie Prinze. Freddie Prinze was born June 22nd, 1954 in Hell's Kitchen, really New York, at 4:09 p.m. Now, Freddie's mother was Puerto Rican and his father was German. Although he used to Hungarian, but really he was Puerto Rican and German. And actually his father had immigrated over to the country from Germany, and so he was the first generation born here. Now, when Freddie was growing up, he was cute, but he was a little bit on the chubby side. And his mother wanted to help him manage his weight, so she enrolled him in a dance school and ballet. He liked it, and he really got into it. And secretly, unbeknownst to them, he went and he auditioned for the LaGuardia High School of Performing Arts and got into the high school where he could continue his ballet. And he did continue dancing and ballet. He also started getting into comedies, like telling jokes around school, and really started trying to hone his craft. And he was pretty good. When he really got into comedy, he would work at such places like the Improv or Catch a Falling Star, and people really liked him. He wanted to be known as the king of comedy, but if you remember, that was what the comedian Alan King called himself, so he couldn't use that name. So David Brenner, the comedian, told him, you can't use that name, be the Prince of Comedy. And so he changed his name to Freddie Prinze. Now, Freddie got his big break when he appeared on The Tonight Show in 1973 with Johnny Carson. And Johnny thought he was hilarious, and Johnny brought him over to the couch. Now, you remember back in the day, Johnny did not bring everybody over to the couch, only if he thought you were truly funny or you had real potential. And Freddie did, and he brought him over there. And from September of 1974 to January of 1977, Freddie Prinze was working on the show that probably everybody knows him the best from, which was Chico and the Man, that starred alongside of Jack Albert. He played the Man, and Freddie Prinze was Chico. And it was about a Puerto Rican guy living in a neighborhood in New York, and this grumpy old guy owned a garage, and Freddie talked him into, well, Chico talked him into coming and working with him, and it was shenanigans from that on, and it was very funny. He also appeared on a television show. One of the more popular ones he was on was Dean Martin's Celebrity Roast, if you remember that. He did a roast of Sammy Davis Jr., and he also did a roast of Muhammad Ali, which were very good. He did a comedy album, which was called Looking Good. Remember, that was his old saying in Chico the Man, looking good. And that was the name of the comedy album. In 1976, he did a television movie called The $1 Million Ripoff, which was pretty good. Freddie was not necessarily the best actor. He really just played Freddie. But he was charming, and he was handsome. And, you know, everyone really loved what he got out. He was really a kind person. Now, in 1975, he married Kathy Barber. I think that's her last name, Kathy Barber. And they had one son, Freddie Prinze Jr., who is also an actor. You may have seen him in, I think it's I Know What You Did Last Summer, and a variety of other films. Now, Freddie started to have addiction problems, living out in Hollywood and trying to live the fast life, hanging out with various comedians and stars. So he started getting into different types of drugs, cocaine, quaaludes. In fact, in 1976, he was arrested for driving under the influence with quaaludes. This was a real problem for his marriage, and his wife had really tried to get him to stop and leave the drugs alone. It just was not something that he is either willing to or wanting to or could do. So after he had gotten arrested for driving under the influence of quaaludes, a few weeks later, his wife filed for divorce. Now, this sent Freddie into a very deep depression. It felt like he had nothing left to live for. Even though he was playing in the show was still, Chico and the Man was still going on. But he'd lost interest in it. You know, we kind of have just played it to death. And how many times could you say looking good and all of that? And he sort of was over it. Now, one of the things that Freddie used to do was, after he purchased a gun, he actually went with Jimmy J.J. Walker. Remember Jimmy Walker from Good Times and another gentleman? And they went with him when he actually bought a gun for himself. And what he would do, just for, you know, fun, was play Russian roulette right there with his friends in the room, and thinking it was funny, except no one really found it especially funny. But on the night of January 28th, 1978, he called his wife and had a long conversation with her. Come to find out, that night he also called several of his very best friends, including Tony Orlando from Tony Orlando and Dawn, who was a very good friend of his. And he was more or less saying his goodbyes to people. And his manager came by to see him that night, January 28th, 1977. Just came by to check on him. Freddie had been super depressed after the divorce. He was using alcohol more and more. He was worse and worse with the drugs. It was really hard to him to focus and do his TV job and any stand-up acts. He had gotten really addicted, and it's just depression took him into that. Once his manager came into the room, he put the gun up to his head and he blew his brains out. He killed himself. They called immediately for help. They had an ambulance who took him to the UCLA Medical Center. They put him on life support. And the very next day, they had to pull the life support. He wasn't going to make it, and he passed away. A lot of people didn't know that he had actually left a suicide note explaining to everybody what he did, and he couldn't go on, and this is why he killed himself. It was a very sad story. It was a very short life. It was like a star came up, it burned bright, and it burned out almost right away. But I want to take a look at Freddie, and I was looking at him before I got with you guys. Very interesting. It's almost as if the writing was on the wall for him automatically. I just don't think that he had the type of support he needed. He was an extremely, extremely sensitive individual. Very sensitive, very caring for everybody. His birthday was June 22nd, 1954. So we already know that makes him a Cancer. That number 6 tells us right there that he had the responsibility for the family. He probably did a lot more around the house than what that even I know. He would have carried a lot of the weight, or making sure that everyone was taken care of, and he was responsible and always doing the right thing. And him going into the arts would have also helped himself and helped his family. Him staying in the arts when he really was kind of burned out, that would have helped his wife and his son. But it was getting to be too much, especially for as sensitive as he was. His birth number is a 22, and that is a master number. That was he was a teacher at that point, or he had the potential to. He was quite young when he died. I think he was like 36 years old. No, I take that back. About 33, 36 years old. So he was just getting into that 22. He never would have lived it to the full potential. He could have, though, because he had freedom in his chart. He had a very public life, and it was very hard for him, and I'll tell you why in a moment, to have to be in the public eye all of the time, in the spotlight. In addition to him going out and partying with people, he also dated a couple of celebrity women. He dated Pam Grier for a while, And then when they broke up, he dated Lynette McGee. And these are very famous African-American actresses. And I think everybody should know Pam Grier Coffee and Foxy Brown and all of that. She was fantastic, a beautiful lady, by the way, still living to this day. When I look at Freddie's life path, you know what his life path is? A number 11. And if you have a number 11 life path, it's always about life and death. Life and death. Either people that you love dearly are passing away and you have to learn about situations in that. It could be a death of relationship, or in this case, a death of himself. He was in a number 7 years, so that tells me that life had been kind of slow for him. He was supposed to have sat down, relaxed, heal from his addictions, rehab, get to know himself as a person without his wife, not being so dependent on that, because that was a codependent relationship. Instead, he took it as, extreme frustration, and no one was interested in me, and no one was giving me any jobs. They got me pigeonholed as Chico and the man, and he never took the time. There was no one around him to tell him better. This guy was almost all water. Listen, his rising is in Scorpio. His sun is in Cancer. His moon is in Pisces, and I'll get back to that. His Mercury is in Cancer. His Mars is, his Venus is in Leo. His Mars is Capricorn. And then his Jupiter was Cancer. His Saturn is Scorpio. This guy was sensitive to the max. He was oversensitive. He was all smiles and giggles in front of the camera, but behind the camera, walking around him was like walking on eggshells. He was very sensitive. He was over emotional. He was temperamental. He would take slights very personally. He didn't have any way to balance himself down, to keep himself down. That moon in Pisces tells you so much. That made him oversensitive. He was a dreamer. He really suffered inside of himself. He had such extreme emotions. He had addictions and escapism, bar none. He had a tendency to absorb all the problems and all the negativity of people around him. And it wasn't like he chose to do that. It was just who he was. And he having that moon, which is a feminine water sign with Pisces in it, it was as if he drowned to death in the emotions of himself, others, his relationship failure, his career not going the way that he wanted it to go. And being with that Pisces moon would make him want to escape, and he couldn't escape. He was so popular, it was unbelievable. The paparazzis were everywhere, and they had photographers and gossip rag papers, National Choir, the Star, and all of that. Everybody writing out him and keeping an eye on him, and it just got to be too much, and he couldn't escape, and there was only one way he knew to go, and that was to take his own life. Ultimately, his family, I believe in 1983, his mother, it was ruled a suicide. Then his mother sued the insurance company, and she actually won. And she said that his death could be attributed to his use of the medication that he had been prescribed. The medications he was prescribed that would have driven him in a direction that he wasn't going to go. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to tell you that is only partially true. He was going to go some kind of way. He was always very emotional, very super sensitive. I wouldn't have even been surprised, and this is just alleged, this is just me, if he struggled with being clear even about his sexuality. But he couldn't go on anymore. They did this, his mom did win the lawsuit, and that helped her down the road a bit financially. But if this was a sad story, there was no place else he felt to go. And at that time, I don't think that you talk so much about going to therapy and counseling and so much more that he could have done. At that point, no, he wasn't going to listen to anyone. That Scorpio made him very fixed and stubborn. And he had a lot of Scorpio. He had that stubborn Capricorn. He just wasn't going to do that. So you weren't going to get it anyways. He was self-medicating, and there just was no way out. But guys, that's the story of Freddie Prinze Jr. I hope you enjoyed that story. Stay tuned for many more.